But the strongest clue for me is that both times I have visited Leandro Canyon since my retirement, I have seen lots of dead cattle there. And I am certain their deaths were not from natural causes. From what I witnessed, there was no reason for so many young healthy cattle to be dead, especially when surrounded by heavy vegetation and plenty of water. So this tells me that the water has to be contaminated from a D3 runoff. In any event, from what I can tell, there have been no cattle in the area for years now. An already contaminated area, plus not being a human water source, usually equates to little or no involvement from left bracket 321 Bureau of Land Management or left bracket 331 Department of Game and Fish Interests. Its perfect left bracket 31 right bracket Project Gasbuggy was the site of the first U.S. underground nuclear experiment for the stimulation of low productivity gas resources. On December 10, 1967, a 29-kiloton nuclear explosive was detonated at a depth of 4,222 feet. The Gasbuggy shot was part of the overall Operation Plowshare Atoms for Peace program, located in the Carson National Forest of NM 36.678 and 107.208 W. Second detonation conducted was Project Rawlson. Left bracket 32 right bracket The Bureau of Land Management BLM is an agency within the United States Department of the Interior, which administers America's public lands, totaling approximately 253 million acres, 1,023,855 km2, or 1/8 of the land mass of the country. Left bracket 33 right bracket State of New Mexico Department of Game and Fish www.wildlife.state.nm.us. Do you have information on the third facility? For instance, when it was completed, who uses it? Talks of a D3 facility had been spoken about well before I ever got there. I know from others that as far back as the mid-1960s that there were always plans to expand. And Gasbuggy was a catalyst to much of this talk, because it just happened to coincide exactly where they had been proposing a new location, to the southwest of Dulce. I know it was completed in 1991. It was supposed to be built during 2 phases, between 1978 and 1980, but the tensions leading up to the 1979 event stopped all development at that time, and it caused a considerable delay. I was retiring in 1983, so what I know about the Dulce facility, events occurring afterwards, are based on the information I got from my intelligence channel. In 1980, Leandro Canyon was being visited by an expansion team from DL to review the terrain for possible development. I know this because I was personally escorting many of them out there by helicopter. Again, with the completion of Leandro Tank in 1980, this opened up many possibilities for the proposed new area to house 2 new joint scientific divisions, ones which required more operating space and unchecked water. Drainage systems. I just knew they would build there, that they would select it because of its contaminated nature. And they did. Can you tell me about Gasbuggy? Project Gasbuggy was a planned underground nuclear detonation in 1967 under the umbrella of the Plowshares program. Project Plowshares represented 2 planned underground nuclear explosions to stimulate gas production of known gas reserves, which were identified but difficult to exploit for various reasons. They believed that the explosions would break up the deep rock formations, softening the geology, release much of that gas that was entrapped. There was Project Rawlson and Project Gasbuggy as part of Project Plowshares. Ralston was another detonation. Did they have to blast the area to expand? No. Not at all, but the analysts at the time informed the engineering corps that the advanced insulating materials developed at Los Alamos would allow them to go right through that area should they need to via maglev, without any maleffects from irradiation. They also said that the softened geology would make work easier for the proposed new facilities, which could be quickly constructed and insulated. I really don't want to get into much more about gas buggy, but what I do know is that the AEC was really trying to leverage natural gas pockets for exploitation. However, the way they went about exploration was not without its many problems. Byproducts did provide some levels of facilitation towards the creation of new facilities, so all of it was justified. The problem is that the 1979 event stopped everything. What saved the D3 installation plans was that despite the 1979 event, Leandro Canyon was far away from the two main facilities, way out to the southwest of Dulce. So they continued on, and built the tank in 1980. But building the maglev, from Dulce out to Leandro Canyon, was completely off the table, at that time. This is because using the tunnel boring machines to construct the intricate levels of subterranean passageways and openings for the facilities required that they begin from the Dulce facility. So it took some time before they restarted construction. Later on, from my intelligence pool, I was told that by 1991, they finally managed to complete D3. And although I have never seen any of it inside, I can tell you now that there is an opening, an emergency shaft constructed as part of the ventilation system, located near the Leandro tank area. I've seen it, recognized the design, and know that it's part of the facility. That's all I needed to see to confirm my intel. Colonel, you keep mentioning 1979. Sounds like a lot was going back then. Can we go back to your retelling about the initial orders you received for Dulce? Yes. Our ad hoc unit was called in because a confrontation had occurred just 48 hours earlier at the Dulce facility between Joint Special Forces units and the inhabitants of the lower installation levels. Our job was to assess the survivors, and we were also to administer a neurobiological agent to everyone during our interview process. The orders listed a very simple protocol to follow. 1. Conduct an initial. 2. Administer the agent. 3. Observe changes. 4. Conduct exit interview. 5. Document all findings. We were to follow these steps for every single person involved. But right away, medicating to me was an immediate red flag. Not because this was not the norm. Rather because I was not an MD, nor was my colleague, or the Brigadier General, for that matter. So with my colleague present, I simply made a quick and quiet inquiry to the Brigadier General. Now mind you, this was not a protest, just a simple inquiry. I asked him were we to administer the neurobiological agent ourselves, without the presence of a doctor, and would a doctor present. My assumption was that a psychiatrist from my unit would be along for this, but that was not the case. He told us both, majors, do as you are goddamn told, or expect reassignments of the worst kind imaginable, for the remainder of your careers, understand? He continued, or if you prefer, expect a dishonorable discharge effective immediately depending on how I feel about the look on your faces. Do I make myself clear? I'll be damned if my whole military career hadn't raced through my mind at that moment. I remember looking at my fellow major, and just through our eye contact we understood one another, agreeing to conform and to shut up, to avoid ruining our careers. Gentlemen, make your decisions now, Fee said. The Major and I gave our yes sirs, and that was the end of it. Very good, the Brigadier General responded. After that we never made any inquiries, outside of normal operating procedures, and we just did what the Brigadier General expected from us. But I tell you, I was amazed at how quickly he could revert back to the friendly demeanor we witnessed upon meeting, from his near demonic state during that moment. After a few minutes had passed, he looked at us both with seriousness and an almost slight tinge of concern. In a very congenial manner, he told us both, Majors, I do not know what the hell is going on here any more than you do. But I do know that the three of us were chosen because of our abilities. He continued, I was told that under the most daunting circumstances that you two men would be the least likely to break down or fail to perform your jobs. That is why you were chosen. At this moment we are headed into a situation of which some parts I am having difficulty comprehending. But in any event, I am going to do my goddamn job, and I expect the same from you. Once we are on that plane, I will be sharing whatever it is I have inside this large envelope with you, and when I do, I expect you to deal with it, whatever it may be. Do you understand? We both nodded and responded with our yes sirs, and it was right then where we began to really wonder what we were involved with. Did you or the other Major have any idea what was coming? No, not at all. If you had told me half the things we would read in those briefing documents, I would have said you were insane. There was so much information, so much to absorb before landing. But they wanted us to view as much as possible. Can you explain what it was you saw in the briefing documents? The Brigadier General's envelope contained 3 complete sets of briefing documents, enough paper in each set to fill a binder. There were lots of documents to review. One document described the incident that had occurred just 2 days earlier, but it was very sparse, lacking lots of data, with very little detail to offer as the event was still literally unfolding over at Dulce. Other documents described the layout of the installation, showing levels accessible to installation personnel, and another gave a detailed operational background of the facility's current use, detailing exactly how it functioned, etc. But much to my surprise, one document was on the history of the facility, which I found a bit odd. Why would I need to understand the history of this place? Also, there were documents containing data about inhabitants of the installation. This immediately caught my attention. Initially, when I read the report on the inhabitants, I thought I was reading about Native American people, but there was something about the description of them that wasn't quite right. Upon reading further, it began to take some real strange turns, with entries I simply couldn't easily wrap my head around. After a few moments spent on this one document in particular, I realized that something was completely amiss here, and I had to stop reading it altogether for a moment to gather my composure. It's just that my mind was having trouble accepting what I was reading. But I was directed to read as much of the material as I could. So I did. As the plane made its way to New Mexico, the other Major and I would periodically stop reading and look at one another, as if to see as if we each had the same documentation. In fact, not so much he was chosen as the commanding officer. Someone must have known he'd not react, and that he would simply do his job as ordered. To some extent, I believe that's why we were all chosen. I thought the references to symbols and inscriptions were referring to some archaeological Native American findings. However, it became quite evident that the writings or inscriptions were pertaining to linguistics of non-human origin, and that I was reading a report describing a species, not a tribe. While continuing to read the documents, the Brigadier General told us that once inside the installation, it was also our job to rendezvous with the U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander, who would be awaiting our arrival. All I knew initially was that he was also being flown into Dulce for the same reason as us, but it was unclear what his role was. The Brigadier General stated that he would be reporting to me and the other major, and that he would mirror us during our work. I eventually learned that he would be photographing and filming everything we did. When he arrived, he was flustered from carrying so much gear and filming equipment, but he was a serious guy. I thought it was strange that a Navy officer was involved, but I would soon learn, after my arrival, that the Dulce installation was operating under joint oversight from the USAF, U.S. Navy and U.S. Army. This group was known as Installation Command. Installation Command is the military administration and proxy organization operating RIO oversight of all scientific and technological research projects. They are also responsible for the black budget and federal contract administration. Amazingly, the RIO installation represents a microcosm similar to the Pentagon, in that there are numerous representatives from each special units of each branch. Left bracket 341 China Lake Naval Weapons Center. Represented via proxy, under the Deputy for Navy, at the nearby left bracket 351 White Sands Missile Range, WSMR. Left bracket 361 Air Force Research Laboratory, /Edwards AFB. Represented via proxy, under the Deputy for Air Force, at WSMR. Left bracket 371 Army Research Laboratory, /left bracket 381 Computational and Information Sciences Directorate GIST. Represented via proxy, under the Garrison Commander, from WSMR. All three groups work under the umbrella of the Department of Defense. I learned all of this through the report. We simply had to understand how that facility operated before we could be allowed to perform any work there. The understanding is that they would not be tolerant of ignorance from anyone involved. This is why we were privy to a full disclosure. And the installation, albeit run by the military, is not a military base. It is a pure scientific research and development facility. I would come to learn that there are two major federal contracting bodies there at Dulce, the left bracket 401 RAND Corporation, who are conducting biogenetics, geology, chemistry, experimental medicine efforts. And the other is left bracket 411 Bechtel Corporation, who manages infrastructure transport, excavation and tunnel construction projects. Left bracket 34 right bracket Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, or NAS. China Lake, is an airborne weapons testing and training range operated by the United States Navy and its contractors. It is located in the northeast of California's Mojave Desert, in northwestern San Bernardino County, southwestern Inyo County, and northeastern Kern County, adjacent to Ridgecrest, California. Left bracket 35 right bracket White Sands Missile Range WSMR is a rocket range of almost 3,200 square miles, 8,300 km2, in parts of 5 counties in southern New Mexico. The largest military installation in the United States, WSMR includes the Oscar Range and the WSMR Otero Mesa Bombing Range. WSMR and the 600,000-acre Fort Bliss Range complex to the south form a contiguous swath of territory for military testing. Left bracket 36 right bracket. The Air Force Research Laboratory AFRL is a scientific research organization operated by the United States Air Force Materiel Command, dedicated to leading the discovery, development, and integration of affordable aerospace warfighting technologies, planning and executing the Air Force Science and Technology Program, and provide warfighting capabilities to United States Air, Space, and Cyberspace Forces. It controls the entire Air Force science and technology research budget. Left bracket 37 right bracket. The Army Research Laboratory ARL is the U.S. Army's corporate research laboratory. ARL is headquartered at the Adelphi Laboratory Center ALC in Adelphi, Maryland. Its largest single site is at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Other major ARL locations include Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, and NASA's Glenn Research Center in Ohio and Langley Research Center in Virginia. Left bracket 38 right bracket. Computational and Information Sciences Directorate GIST is an Army Research Laboratory ARL Technical Directorate. Left bracket 39 right bracket. The Department of Defense is an evolution of the Department of War. The United States Department of Defense initially briefly referred to as the National Military Establishment, or NME, is the U.S. federal department charged with coordinating and supervising all agencies and functions of the government relating directly to national security and the United States Armed Forces. Caret 4 right bracket. RAND Corporation Research and Development is a non-profit global policy think tank first formed to offer research and analysis to the United States Armed Forces by Douglas Aircraft Company. It is currently financed by the U.S. government, a private endowment, and corporations including the healthcare industry, universities, and private individuals. RAND had $230.07 million 08 FUN in revenue. Left bracket 41 right bracket. Bechtel Corporation. Bechtel Group is the largest engineering company in the United States, ranking as the 5th largest privately owned company in the U.S. With headquarters in the financial district of San Francisco, Bechtel had 44,000 employees as of 2009, working on projects in nearly 50 countries, with $31.4 billion in revenue. Are there other contractors besides these two? Only a few. Left bracket 421, Applied Molecular Genetics, left bracket 431 URS Corp, left bracket 441 Raytheon, left bracket 451 IBM, and that is it. At least up to 1983, when I was there. Those groups come in as subcontractors, using their GSA, left bracket 461 General Service Administration schedules. It was their ticket in. Their GSA is sort of an awarded right to do business with any federal entities and the US military. Those companies I mentioned all work under Bechtel or RAND, who are the prime contractors at Dulles, and these two have pre-structured guaranteed no-bid contracts with Rio Riba. Dulles left bracket 42 right bracket. Applied Molecular Genetics Amgen Inc. is an international biotechnology company headquartered in Thousand Oaks, California. Located in the Conejo Valley, Amgen is the world's largest independent biotech firm. Amgen had $14.6 billion 09 FUN in revenue. Left bracket 43 right bracket. URS Corporation is an engineering design firm and a U.S. federal government contractor. Fleet headquartered in San Francisco, California. URS is a full-service global organization with offices located in the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific. URS Corporation Head, $9,240, $9 billion 09 FUN, in revenue left bracket 44, right bracket Raytheon Company NYSE. RTN is a major American defense contractor and industrial corporation with core manufacturing concentrations in defense systems and defense and commercial electronics. It was previously involved in corporate and special mission aircraft until early 2007. Raytheon had 24.881 billion 09 FUN in revenue left bracket 45 right bracket International Business Machines. IBM is an American multinational computer technology and consulting corporation headquartered in Armonk, New York, United States. IBM is the world's fourth largest technology company and the second most valuable global brand after Coca-Cola. IBM is one of the few information technology companies with a continuous history dating back to the 19th century. IBM manufactures and sells computer hardware and software with a focus on the latter and offers infrastructure services, hosting services, and consulting services in areas ranging from mainframe computers to nanotechnology. IBM had $103.6 billion 09 FUN in revenue. 46 General Services Administration GSA. Former President Herbert Hoover was asked in 1947 by President Harry Truman to lead a commission to make recommendations to the President and Congress on how to improve the administrative activities of the federal government. One of the recommendations of the Commission was the establishment of an Office of the General Services. This proposed office would combine the responsibilities of the Treasury Department's Bureau of Federal Supply and Office of Contract Settlement, the National Archives and Records Administration establishment, the Federal Work Agency, and the War Assets Administration. GSA became an independent agency on July 1, 1949, following the passage of the Federal Property and Administrative Services Act. How do they get paid? The money trails go invisible once they are inside. And personally, I have never understood the left bracket 471 black budget aspect of DULS that well. But there definitely is an influx of money, so it is Installation Command Senior Controller's job to manage it. The financial office has a very tight grip on that area. But as you know, without money there is no show. So of course money is critical to the success of the facility, including its secrecy. If you like, we could talk more about this aspect later. But for now I'd like to focus on my arrival. Left bracket 47 right bracket. A black budget is a budget that is secretly collected from the overall income of a country, a corporation, a society of any form, a national department, and so on. A black budget usually covers expenses related to military research. The budget is kept secret for national security reasons. Understood? Can please continue telling about when you traveled to DULS for that first time? Yes. On our way there, we had been told to read everything twice. They wanted us to be absolutely sure of how to handle the situation and the inhabitants. The Brigadier General said that some of the things we would hear from survivors were going to seem fantastical at first, but that everything was factually verifiable, and that reading the documents carefully would clarify any questions we had. As I read more, I reviewed documents on the background of the inhabitants, but I was told to also focus on the facility layout, as it was real easy to get lost once inside without a guide. And we were told to study the illustrations and descriptions of the weapons technology and facility equipment, but not ours, rather, the ones used and created by the inhabitants. Strangely, we were told to review the documents on the aliens' physiological makeup as well. This is where the other major came into play. He was a comparative physiology specialist, having already studied a multitude of life forms. All this was in addition to his also possessing a psychology background. So together we would assist one another and document each other's finds. We were told that we would have a 48-hour window of clearance at the installation starting the second we arrived, and that upon conclusion of those 48 hours, we would be escorted out. So it was imperative that we conduct a workable time frame, using accelerated protocols, condensing the ones we were already familiar with. We were also told that once there, we were stuck there even in the event that we finished our work early. The Brigadier General said all personnel except the security division were going to be evacuated within the final hour of our 48. He said the installation would be sealed up until experts could later perform analysis of the event and our findings as to determine how best to proceed back into the installation without incident. The environment was crazy when we arrived. We had been indoctrinated through a few short but intense meetings with the security division and had been directed to areas we were supposed to have familiarized ourselves with during the flight. Thankfully we did. There was a large group of people being attended to, some medically but mostly with blankets and coffee, some food. In addition, we had also seen a room with body bags, lots of them. It was a makeshift morgue with all the tags neatly stacked in a section of this room on the upper facility that was kept apart from the people who were waiting for processing. Before we left, we had to account for all the missing people, so we worked in the room for a spell, ensuring that all the people there were entered into our list. This helped identify who was still missing, as all the living people had been processed. Anyhow, when we began setting up our station, the people knew that they would need to be interviewed before being let go via the maglev shuttle back to the Los Alamos National Laboratory access point. These were just regular people, scientists, chemists, engineers, and technical people of all manners who worked there. This fact amazed me. How do they do it? I remember asking myself. I kept thinking, how do these people work here and say nothing? I later learned that average federal contractor for both subs and primes were earning a six-figure salary. And this is in the 1970s, so consider that, plus the fact that they each have been vetted thoroughly. And probably threatened as well. Colonel, where is the access point? There are several of them. The main one being exactly where you would expect a large group of people to assemble daily, and where you would need the infrastructure to employ human resources management activities. And it's the perfect cover too, underneath left bracket 481, technical area 3 Lanlota 3 is the primary access point. Take a look at the number of parking areas there and ask yourself, why the hell do they need so much parking? The Otoe building is not that big, but many people congregate in the vicinity daily. And where are so many of them going? To Dulce, that's where. And there are other landfill areas too. Ta 41, Ta 49, and the airport Ta 73 to mention the most high-profile ones. Technical Area 3 Landfill Ta 3 is the landfill main technical area, which houses approximately half of the landfill employees, and contains about half of the total landfill floor space. It is the entry point to the laboratory, and most of the administrative and public access activities are located within its boundaries. The site also contains a mixture of LANL activities, which include experimental sciences, S&M, administrative public and corporate access, theoretical/computations, and physical support operations. Security requirements at TA3 range from buildings open to the general public to buildings that have the strictest security. The latter buildings are provided with fences, guards, electronic surveillance, and other security measures as necessary, and personnel must have appropriate security clearances to enter. I'm going to seg a bit, but how does a group of individuals who worked at Duke not divulge anything about the secret nature of the installation? It seems to me that trying to conceal a place where a lot of people worked at would be very difficult, correct? One thing you have to understand that at this level of operation, handling of sensitive information in addition to conducting strict personnel management is done through teams of dedicated specialized people whose work is to ensure that only the right type of person is ever selected, vetted, and processed through conditioning, a subset of processes or techniques which were adopted from a program called left bracket 491 Cultra. Cultra has a dark past, but the methods evolved and extracted for purposes of conditioning work. So they use them. They meaning the SIA and shadow groups like DSD3. For the civilian contractor population, their clearance involves a high-level vetting process called canvassing, resulting in a civilian personnel resource pool. These people receive various levels of top-secret clearances specific to their roles or work designations, and they also receive high salaries. Also, you have to keep in mind that workers who are well compensated are taught to shut their mouths and forget about anything other than their work and collecting their check. Imagine a research scientist who normally would make $4.5K a year, who is instead making $250K per year with all the benefits of a major corporate entity, which includes medical bonuses, vacations, training, further education, travel, per diems, etc. Do you think anyone is going to risk losing that? But most of all, consider that these civilian federal contract workers have been known to disappear when rules are broken, or any semblances of rumors of dissension reach the security division. And they, the workers, know damned well that the stories of missing people are not rumors, but actual cases involving former friends, and in some cases loved ones. To be silenced permanently would mean you broke the one cardinal rule of dulce, disclosure of any kind. Another scenario is to exhibit any nature of instability of character that can pose a threat of disclosure of the facility. And the workers all know this, so no one talks, but getting people to work at dulce or any other highly secretive facility was not always a controlled process. And it was harder in the earlier days to ensure you were getting the right type of individual. But by the early 1960s, it became easier. Through lessons learned from Cultra, the CIA discovered that to control behavior, to ensure that rules and restrictions are adhered to with unfailingly loyalty, they would need to establish a process to vet potential candidates through measures which could expose any unwanted traits, physical, psychological, or behavioral. They only wanted highly qualified people deeply committed to maintaining the nation's security, plus the secrecy of our classified operations and locations. So candidates chosen for work at sensitive top secret installations such as dulce would be acquired from a highly selective group of military personnel, people beyond accessibility to normal military and operative channels. These are people pulled by special recommendation from a team of top analysts at the Pentagon called evaluators. These people perform tasks with an emphasis on personnel placement through a scientific means of evaluation. The evaluation is performed after attempts are made to inculcate thoughts and behavior into the candidates through processes of persistent instruction. This is the conditioning I mentioned to you earlier. After a candidate is selected, an evaluator would begin conditioning by administering a series of serums, combined with a battery of physical assessments and specially designed interviews to monitor both behavioral and psychological reaction. Today, those who pass the conditioning process are then entered into a resource pool managed by the U.S. Army, but shared with the Department of Defense, called the left bracket 501 Integrated Total Army Personnel Database (ETIP) portal. And these operative personnel candidates can be recalled for ongoing projects at any time. Back then everything was on paper and in files. This process was really slow, so to centralize the pool, it no longer matters what branch of the military the candidates come from. If they fit the requirement, they are entered into a secure and classified section of ETIP, accessible to those outside the Army, so long as they come with proper clearance, only given through the Pentagon. And now the candidate's personnel info is held within ETIP for a finite period of time, usually 10 to 15 years, or until such time that they find themselves disqualified from any further consideration. DULS is filled with people obtained through this process, as are many other classified U.S. facilities around the world, underground or not. Left bracket 49 right bracket Project Ultra, or MK Ultra, was the code name for a covert, illegal CIA human research program run by the Office of Scientific Intelligence. This official U.S. government program began in the early 1950s, continuing at least through the late 1960s, and it used U.S. and Canadian citizens as its test subjects. Left bracket 501 Department of Defense Military Integrated Total Army Personnel Database (ETIP) is the Army's multi-component HR database, providing numerous dot systems with relevant soldier and civilian information. ETIP is a crucial data source for the dimers load because it consolidates data from the component tabs. Interesting, please continue. Well, we were told that we were entering into a classified demilitarized zone. The Brigadier General said an event involving fighting at the installation triggered off a set of seldom used protocols, establishing it immediately as a left bracket 511 DMZ. I thought to myself, how could there be a DMZ right here in America, within our own borders? I could not believe it. Just what the hell was this place? Nothing was making sense. But the report said that there was a newly formed classified DMZ in place with full military oversight and active operations, and the Brigadier General confirmed it. The place was on high alert. Left bracket 51 right bracket a demilitarized zone DMZ is an area, usually the frontier or boundary, between two or more military powers or alliances, where military activity is not permitted, usually by peace treaty, armistice, or other bilateral or multilateral agreement. Often the demilitarized zone lies upon a line of control and forms a de facto international border. Colonel, with all the information that was given to you, did you feel there was still a chance that not all items were being disclosed to you? Oh no. Not at all. I felt as if I was being told everything, and possibly a little too much too fast. You see, I had no idea if by chance would be there beyond the 48-hour period, or if we would ever return to Dulles. But I do remember asking myself, why are we getting so much data? Anyhow, we finally made our way to Kirtland AFB. Once we were there, we made our way to the Dulles facility via helicopter. There was an unimproved road that I later learned of, which we could have taken to the installation once we reached the town of Dulles, but this road required high-lift off-road vehicles, and the area was already completely inaccessible. There were impenetrable blockades being manned by military personnel just a few miles from the town because of the ongoing events, so no one was getting anywhere near the mesa. And the way they orchestrated everything was so tightly controlled that I do not think that anyone from the surrounding area had a clue as to what was occurring. And trying to traverse the areas surrounding the mesa, even today, is not as easy as one may think. The hillsides leading up to the mesa are covered with pocketed areas of shale and blankets of larger rocks when they are not covered with snow. During dry months, if you can make it up, you will find lots of pocketed high-density tree areas, interspersed amongst a large dry area, sitting atop the plateau of the mesa. I told my wife that if I had to choose a single place to live my final days on Earth, it would northern New Mexico, anywhere between Dulles and Taos. It truly is a beautiful part of the country. But you still have to be cautious, as the whole area represents some of the roughest terrain in this country. It's very beautiful, but can come at a cost if you do not know what the hell you are doing. Despite the high elevation, the area comes with all the dangers of a dry forest, coupled with hot desert-like conditions during the summer. Hell, we used to joke that the higher you were, the hotter it got. But the most treacherous aspect would be just that, the elevation. It's deceptive, very deceptive. You have a montane desert-like environment, which means the plateau, like some deserts, is very arid, but just during summer months, because it's at, or just above over 9,000 feet. So this means you have much thinner air. Plus you also have the elements of a dangerous and unpredictable rugged rocky mountainous region, especially due to much of it resting upon fragmentary columnar basalt, making for a very dangerous climb. That's why they call it the desert high terrain. You have both elements. Because of the arid environment, a person hiking up there in the high desert can lose up to 4 liters per day, and to make matters worse, altitude sickness can easily set in at 8,000 feet. Again, the Dulles Mesa is 9,000 feet. Only experienced outdoorsmen, academic research teams, or the local people themselves from the left bracket 52 right bracket Jicarilla Apache Nation are the only ones capable of surviving up in there for any prolonged amount of time. Again, the dirt roads leading up to the mesa are unfriendly, just making it very hard to climb, whether on foot or by vehicle. In any event, someone opted for us not to drive, so instead we were flown in by helicopter. A decision made to expedite our arrival. Left bracket 52 right bracket Jicarilla Apache Nation refers to an Apache people. The term Jicarilla comes from Mexican, Spanish meaning little basket. Their autonym is Ndi, or Dini, meaning the people. To neighboring Apache bands like the Mescalero and Lipan, they were known as Quinyolan people, who live in fixed houses. They are enrolled in the Jicarilla Apache Nation. The Jicarilla Apache Indian Reservation is located within 2 northern New Mexico counties, Rio Ripa County and Sandoval County. The reservation has a land area of 1,364.046 sq mi, 3,532.864 km2, and had a population of 2,755 as of the 2000 census. Its capital is Dulles, which comprises over 95% of the reservation's population, near the extreme north end. Most tribal offices are located in Dulles. Do you ever go back? Oh yes, I've been back more than a few times, not always on business. For instance, once in 1994, to meet an old friend, to do some fishing. But usually when I go there, it's to do some work gathering data. I am retired, but remain active within the periphery of my intelligence circle because of many reasons. Reasons mostly based on dark business that occurs there that I cannot, in good conscience, allow going on without some level of disclosure. That is the reason why we are talking. I have lots to divulge and I want you to get it out. Recently in 2009 I was at left bracket 531 Rio Hikawa's left bracket 541 Dulles conference. This was in March of 2009. I was there. In fact, I was sitting in my car having coffee when the first of two helicopters flew over the hotel. Let me tell you, a whole lot of interesting things happened there. But let me tell you more about 1979 so we stay on track. I'll get to my more recent events before we wrap up, I promise. Left bracket 53 right bracket Norio Hikawa is a noted ufologist and civilian activist. He has spent almost 20 years investigating Area 51 in Nevada and the deep underground base at Dulles, New Mexico. Hikawa was one of the first to bring Project Bluebeam to public attention in his 1995 documentary video Secrets of Dreamland, which suggested that a covert government would have sufficient technology to artificially simulate a UFO threat in order to bring about a forced global unity. Left bracket 541, the Dulles Base, Fact or Fiction Conference, March 29th to 30th. 2009. Dulles, New Mexico Best Western Jacurluin, ampersand Local Civic Meeting Center. The conference marked the first major meeting of speakers with knowledge of events at Dulles. Excellent. Dulles, let's continue. So, the report I held in my hands stated that in 1940, the U.S. Army had discovered a 7-level subterranean facility, the size of a small city by chance, nestled smack dab in the center of the left bracket 551 Arculeta Mesa. This discovery came about when they began scouting areas of New Mexico for potential sites to house our atomic development and testing program. Arculeta Mesa is a mountain summit in Rio Ripa County, in the state of New Mexico NM. Arculeta Mesa climbs to 9,078 feet 2,766.97 meters above sea level. Arculeta Mesa is located at latitude-longitude coordinates, also called lat-long coordinates or GPS coordinates, of N36.997, 232 and W1, 106.970315. Did our atomic development start in 1942 with the Manhattan Project? No, you have to go back a little further than that to when talks actually began in 1938. That's when atomic talks really started. It was by 1939 when FDR called up Lyman Briggs, a physicist who was in charge of the left bracket 561 National Bureau of Standards, to head up left bracket 571 the Uranium Committee. This was a newly formed State Department, created to undertake all nuclear research. All of this began as a result of the left bracket 581, EINSTEINSCILARD lecture. That's the lecture that set off a hellfire storm in Washington. You see, the letter strongly advised President Roosevelt to begin our own atomic development and research efforts because the Nazis were already researching the destructive power of nuclear bombs, and they were far ahead of everyone else, most importantly us. This task was unlike anything else ever handled by our military and government, and everyone knew that special precautions and steps needed to be taken. At that time there was no CIA or DOT to coordinate and lead military efforts or intelligence operations. If you look back, within our government and military, information was very disparate at best, and already we had begun to see groups creating simultaneous teams duplicating efforts. For instance, there was no direction, no management, or any control. At one point, no one knew for a period of time. Both the Army and Navy each had separate code-breaking departments, left bracket 591 Signals Intelligence Service, and left bracket 601, Op 20G, doing the same exact thing. So the prevalent concern was that this absolutely could not happen within a program as sensitive as atomic development. It had to be conducted under one roof and tightly controlled. Believe it or not, FDR himself made a damned good suggestion to ensure that only one branch would be running operations. He felt that since talks had already begun, as far back as 1938 on, how eventually the United States Army Corps of Engineers USACE would take over all real estate acquisition, construction, and maintenance for Army facilities by 1941. Well, he suggested that they be in charge of assisting the scientists from the left bracket 611 Manhattan Project, which was already underway as a small research program, and only them. This made sense because the Army Corps of Engineers had planes, soldiers, and the necessary resources required. Therefore, he mandated that the Army Corps of Engineers alone head up the project to build up a secret centralized location to facilitate the scientific research of the Manhattan Project. So as a result, much of the information in the 1940 Dulles reports is indirectly related to our atomic development program. All of this was occurring many months before October 9, 1941, when FDR gave the go-ahead for the development of an atomic weapon. So you see, the Murik expedition was already in place, happening before anyone was aware. We were already ahead of the game. National Bureau of Standards (NBS), known between 1901 and 1988 as NBS, today is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST is a measurement standards laboratory, which is a non-regulatory agency of the United States Department of Commerce. The SL Uranium Committee was a committee of the National Defense Research Committee that succeeded the Briggs Advisory Committee on Uranium and later evolved into the Manhattan Project. The EINSTEINSCILARD letter was a letter sent to United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt on August 2, 1939, that was signed by Albert Einstein, but largely written by Leo Szilard, in consultation with fellow Hungarian physicists Edward Teller and Eugene Wigner. The letter advised Roosevelt that Nazi Germany might be researching the use of nuclear fission to create atomic bombs, and suggested that the U.S. should begin its own research because of the potentially vast destructive power of such bombs. Left bracket 59 right bracket the Signals Intelligence Service (SIS) was the United States Army code-breaking division, headquartered at Arlington Hall. It was a part of the Signal Corps, so secret that outside the office of the Chief Signal Officer, it did not officially exist. William Friedman began the division, with 3 junior cryptanalysts, in April 1930. Their names were Frank Rowlett, Abraham Sinkov, and Solomon Kolobach. OP-20G, or Office of Chief of Naval Operations on OV, 20th Division of the Office of Naval Communications, G Section/Communications Security, was the US Navy's signals intelligence and cryptanalysis group during World War II. Its mission was to intercept, decrypt, and analyze naval communications from Japanese, German, and Italian navies. Left bracket 61 right bracket. The Manhattan Project was the code name for a project conducted during World War II to develop the first atomic bombs. The project was led by the United States and included participation from the United Kingdom and Canada. Formerly designated as the Manhattan Engineer District Med, sometimes referred to as the Manhattan District, it refers specifically to the period of the project, from 1942 to 1946, under the control of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and General Leslie R. Groves. The scientific research was directed by American physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. What do you mean by the Murik expedition? That's right. You would have never heard about them, would you have? No, you would not have. So let me explain. With the Army Corps of Engineers now in charge of new facility development, they chose a special detachment of pilots and ground troops from left bracket 621 Murik Army Airfield out in California, which was still called the Murik Lake Bombing and Gunnery Range at that time. This unit was quickly assembled, assigned the job of finding us a home for our atomic development efforts. Sadly, they'll never receive credit for what they did or for what they discovered. It was the left bracket 631 Murik expedition who found the subterranean facility mentioned in the report, but they went off obscurely into history because after making the greatest discovery of the modern age, many of them were either dead or reassigned to classified positions. Some were discharged. This was a group of men who didn't know what the hell they were getting into, and the fact that so many of them died after the discovery event, not during but after the fighting, and with no official recognition. Well, it breaks my heart as a soldier, and as an American left bracket 62 right bracket, originally known as the Murik Army Airfield. The base was renamed to Edwards AFB on December 8, 1949 in memory of U.S. Air Force test pilot Glenn Edwards, 1918-48, who died 18 months earlier while testing the Northrop YB-49 flying wing. The Murik Expedition 1940. Select group of soldiers with specialties in spelunking, surveying, sharpshooting, geology and tracking. Chosen to perform ground reconnaissance, assisting piloting squad, searching for land requirements of atomic testing and development. Are you saying there was fighting back in 1940 at the Mesa? Oh yes, the news of the initial fighting, upon their discovery of the location, really created a stir back at the airfield. Eventually, false information was given to those directly affected, families, colleagues, commanding officers, etc., to protect the location and to preserve top secret nature of the findings. I thought you said that the Army had made the discovery. They did, don't get confused. You have to understand, this is before the Air Force was established. Murik was an airfield, but it was the Army. Back in those days, the Army held oversight of the vast number of pilots in the military. And it wasn't until September 1947, under the left bracket 641 National Security Act, that the U.S. Air Force was formed as a new separate branch of the military. Before that, it was the USAC, U.S. Army Air Corps. Anyhow, in the report I read that what they found was that the upper levels of this facility were all but abandoned. The report also indicated that the initial exploration went forth successfully without incident even once deep inside the facility, mostly in part because the soldiers selected were experts in various areas. This is going to sound very old-fashioned by today's standards, but the unit included geological experts, a surveyor, several trackers and cave experts. We called them cavers back then, today they're known as spelunkers. Anyhow, there were even a few very good sharpshooters on the team. For 1940 this was sort of an ad hoc, special forces unit. The group was formed in order to serve as a ground unit with experts in various fields to complement the pilots flying overhead, determining where, in the terrain, the expedition team would go next. Everyone was handpicked at Murik. In the military you must be prepared for anything, and when this team was assembled, they intended it to be as a good team as you could create to help overcome the rough terrain of New Mexico. But by chance, unbeknownst to whomever assembled the team, they also created a unit that would be a pretty good fighting force, as they would soon find out. And you know what? There couldn't have been a better group chosen. The valor and bravery, and even the foolishness I read of in the reports from 1940 really tell me a lot about those men. Sometimes when I think about what I read, I almost felt as if I was there. The National Security Act of 1947 was signed by United States President Harry S. Truman on July 26, 1947 and realigned and reorganized the U.S. Armed Forces, foreign policy, and intelligence community apparatus in the aftermath of World War II. The majority of the provisions of the Act took effect on September 18, 1947, the day after the Senate confirmed James Forrestal as the first Secretary of Defense. Colonel, what did they find inside the facility? In the reports prepared by the soldiers who were told to record what they had found, they discovered that the uninhabited upper levels held many of what appeared to be ancient artifacts, interspersed among modern-looking but unfamiliar machines. Some walls were covered with radar-like screens, and there also appeared to be individual personnel stations, but mysteriously not large enough for any human to fit in. And some fitted with various sorts of cryptography machines, or what appeared to possibly be electric typewriters. All of these were connected to the flat radar-like screens. Hell, they didn't have a clue. The soldiers were not sure what any of it was or what it was used for. One soldier wrote, "Everything we are finding is highly sophisticated in design, way beyond our latest military electronic equipment. It looks to be German, possibly." The commanding officer wrote that in each room, there appeared to be devices similar to electronic television sets, maybe German in appearance, but immense in size and very flat, covering most every wall, near any of the equipment, or electric machines. At first he thought these were windows, but he could see that these somehow offered a view, or a screen to the many stations positioned in front of them. And the surface was smooth as glass. In fact, it was glass, but had a liquid of some sort inside it which seemed impossible, because it was paper thin. In the same report, it also stated that there were thick black cables, with hundreds of individual lighted wires inside, as fine as hair. They appeared to be like glass, but were physically malleable without causing damage, even when twisting or bending them. Extruding from the ends of the wires, the bundles of exposed glass wires, with lighted ends, seemed to be receiving transmitted signals of some kind. There was a pattern to the blinking, but they weren't sure from what it was or from where it was coming. Upon following the source of the cables, showed that they came from deep beneath the upper levels. Many were severed, seemingly removed through a rough extraction process, almost as if someone had cut them. What was strange was that indication by the surrounding evidence pointed to the equipment being hundreds of years old, possibly, and left undisturbed for that long. The curious ones asked how could there be a power source, and this is where it becomes really strange. An area of the report that had me questioning not only if what I was reading was real, and what had me questioning why was I going to this place. You see, in addition to all the modern-looking machinery, the report stated that just past the cavern entrance, and nearly several hundred feet inside, they had found American Indian blades, discernible from the leather sheaths and cloth wrapping style upon handles made from bone. They also found over 100 arrows, bows, and quivers, each dated to about the late 1800s, and this corroborated the few Colt revolvers and Winchester repeater rifles they found, still in perfect usable condition. Lying nearby there was both unused and spent ammunition, strewn about as if something violent had occurred in there. The report stated that the soldiers wanted to touch the artifacts, but the commanding officer, having the sense to preserve what they found for the experts, ordered them to not touch anything, under threat of court-martial. The commanding officer wrote that nothing was right about this location. He felt everything seemed out of place, almost as if discovering anachronisms with each new room they entered. Futuristic machines, but easily capable of being hundreds of years old, based on the way webs, dirt, and dust had accumulated on the devices. It didn't make any sense. Once deeper inside the facility, he also wrote that they found human remains. Some apparently were American Indians, easily identified by their traditional clothing. But he stated that no Indian he knew dressed like that anymore. This was stuff that he swore that mid-19th century Apache warriors wore. At first they thought they could place the find to at least the 1840s, but later they determined it was probably closer to the 1870s because of the Colt revolvers they found. The commanding officer wrote in the report what were Apache warriors doing here, and who were they fighting, and for what reason. He wrote that he told everyone to pull back and set up camp at the end of the first day of exploring the caverns inside and underneath the mesa. That night they slept without incident. The next day they made their way deeper into the caverns and noticed that the natural formations on the walls began to give way to a more structured and uniform patterns of large flat walls made of some metallic matted substance. Interspersed between these segments were smaller segments, where the walls had a smooth black layer of what appeared to be highly polished down conglomerate rock, almost granite-like in appearance, but different in that it had both a liquid and illuminant property to it. No one had ever seen such a material before. When you pressed your hand up against it, an illuminated print remained for some time. Some soldiers began writing with their fingers before the commanding officer ordered them to stop. What also mystified them were the rectangular windows, with strange fluorescent purple lighting, almost lavender in color, and ice cold to the touch. And then, if it couldn't get any stranger, they began to find diminutive human-like remains, with enlarged heads and very large eye sockets, many of them strewn about. The area where the cavern began to transition from natural cavern to a fabricated structure. All around the first areas surveyed, there were signs of a struggle and serious firefighting, as they found more weapons, dead bodies, and carbon blasts on the walls from having been shot at. But from how long ago the fighting occurred was anyone's guess. No one was sure exactly. The American Indian bodies were further out. But these new small human-like remains were being found much deeper into the facility. The officer wrote that maybe someone had chased them down up to this point in the cave corridor and then killed them. To know for sure, he wrote that they were going to need expert help. As they began, webs, dirt, and dust, indicating possible decades of lying there completely undisturbed. Nothing made sense, so the commanding officer in charge of the scouting expedition had enough awareness to call someone else in, a personal friend of his back at Uruk, a highly educated officer with a degree in archaeology who possessed a very methodical scientific approach to every aspect of his work. Within 2 days, he was flown in, and with his help he was able to catalog and expertly remove everything, with both precision and academic prudence, thus preserving all the artifacts, along with meticulous documentation. From what I gathered from the report, the commanding officer himself was pretty astute and well aware of what he had discovered. His decision to place an archaeology expert in charge of the site recovery operation proved to be an incredibly crucial decision, vital to later successes in our own technological advancements. ~s~r // greater than C's sc caret v caret underscore s caret r dot caret 5 tilde greater than 7j dot v7 v caret greater than v flv caret v osbs underscore greater than caret 7s 7s caret dot svv 7v caret underscore s7 v underscore 7v dot r s caret s asterisk equal greater than vsv O asterisk equal I tilde 7 vs I caret 7 asterisk caret greater than 7 caret asterisk gray archaeological tablet artist's rendition. As I kept reading, I learned that in some rooms they found super thin metallic sheets, which they called tablets, containing writing. These had writings which were etched onto the surface with machine-like precision. Large paper-thin metal sheets of these tablets, acting as some advanced form of writing surface, used to document something. The newly arrived officer's team of scientific experts noted that the writing found on the tablets resembled cuneiform script from ancient left bracket 651 Mesopotamia, particularly left bracket 661 Akkadian cuneiform. However, these figures seem to be much more compact in design and contain many differences not found in the known cuneiform. The commanding officer wrote that it was these men that began to call these writing sheets tablets because of the similarity of the writing on the stone tablets discovered during archaeological expeditions in Iraq during the 1840s. But these tablets and the cuneiform were easily seen as highly version, well beyond the complexity of the Mesopotamian finds, and they observed how no living person could have done this work by hand. These finds were set apart from their archaeological counterparts found in Iraq. In the report it stated that all the equipment included some different unidentifiable marking symbols, and there were a few other distinct types of writing styles found elsewhere in other rooms too. I later learned that after some years of research by the U.S. Army and various academic experts that they would fully translate the language and confirm that it was a highly advanced form of cuneiform inscription, but with many variations and much more complex attributes than seen in Akkadian cuneiform, and it seemed to have an alphabetic structure more similar to the complexity of the later left bracket 671 Ugaritic alphabet. The markers for dating the cuneiform seemed to jump back and forth in time, but its roots were the same. Again, there was this strange aspect to nearly everything found, and the writing was not without its own mysteries. It would later be determined that the Akkadian and Ugaritic civilizations used adopted forms of this language, and while crude in their own adaptations, very functional and seemingly to be directly from the language root discovered in the caverns. But how they got these was another question. Within a few years' time, both academic and military linguistics teams would eventually develop the ability to fully translate the language, and the Army would fund the creation of a translation device. The device was typewriter-like in physical design, and it outputted the advanced cuneiform script in exact translations, a feat truly advanced for its time. But with regard to translation devices, that would all change dramatically just a decade or so later once we gained the full trust of the inhabitants. So in addition to this, their goal was to attempt reverse engineering of all the equipment they found, and to communicate with whoever was down there. Through the translation of the language, they deciphered the metal tablets, of which so many had been found nearly everywhere in the caverns and corridors, which led to rooms. Mesopotamia is a toponym for the area of the Tigris-Euphrates river system, largely corresponding to modern-day Iraq, as well as some parts of northeastern Syria, southeastern Turkey, and southwestern Iran. Widely considered to be the cradle of civilization, Bronze Age Mesopotamia included Sumer and the Akkadian, Babylonian and Assyrian empires. In the Iron Age, it was ruled by the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian empires. The indigenous Sumerians and Akkadians, including Assyrians, and Babylonians, dominated Mesopotamia from the beginning of written history c. 3100 BC to the fall of Babylon in 539 BC, when it was conquered by the Achaemenid Empire. It fell to Alexander the Great in 332 BC, and after his death, it became part of the Greek Seleucid Empire. Akkadian cuneiform. The archaic cuneiform script was adopted by the Akkadians from ca. 2500 BC, and by 2000 BC, had evolved into Old Assyrian cuneiform, with many modifications to Sumerian orthography. The Semitic equivalents for many signs became distorted or abbreviated to form new phonetic values, because the syllabic nature of the script, as refined by the Sumerians, was unintuitive to Semitic speakers. The Ugaritic script is a cuneiform wedge-shaped object used from around 1400 BCE for Ugaritic, an extinct Northwest Semitic language, and discovered in Ugarit, modern Ras Shamra, Syria, in 1928. It has 31 letters. Other languages were occasionally written in the Ugaritic script in the area around Ugarit. Clay tablets written in Ugaritic provide the earliest evidence of both the West and South Semitic orders of the alphabet, which gave rise to the alphabetic orders of the Hebrew, Greek, and Latin alphabets on the one hand, and of the Ge'ez alphabet on the other. Kernel, who are the inhabitants? This is complicated, as there were several groups we learned of, but only which one ever occupied the caverns. At first we did not understand why, but with time, it all became clear. Now, with the ability to read their writings, the names of the subterranean inhabitants and other associated groups were discovered, as was their entire history. Over time, our researchers began to understand exactly what had happened at this location, understanding who these inhabitants and other groups were, and who among them was outside of the caverns. And we also learned how and why, with all of their technology, they were seemingly trapped here. Do you mean outside, as in?
And shout over the pictures that are
on the surface? Exactly. The lives of one group extends beyond the subterrane. The other group is everywhere, concentrated around various communities, and with a specific agenda. There were a total of 4 groups. Today there are only 2. First are the progenitors, aliens from the Sirius system. Second are the Anu and Nana, possibly the same as the Anunnaki, from ancient Sumer, their genetically enhanced offspring, the progenitors. Third is the Austro-Albus, the offspring of the Anu, and finally the Grease, not related genetically to the progenitor lineage. If you will, there is a 5th group. Modern humans, genetically modified for a specific reason. Colonel Grease, are you saying there are aliens in Duke? Yes, Grease beneath Dulce and alien human hybrids, upon the surface. 2 groups remain. Where did they come from, and how did the Grease get inside Dulce? Why are they there? The first historical reference discovered was to a group of beings, representing a creator class, simply called the progenitors, a powerfully advanced group of distant celestial origin. This group was often referred to by the others as simply the gods, the creators or progenitors. The origins of the progenitors begins in left bracket 6s1 zeta reticuli, but for reasons unknown to the Greeks, the progenitors en masse left for the Sirius system. And the reason for that decision is not known. However, what is known is that the progenitors migrated and occupied 2 planets in the left bracket 691 Sirius system from that point on. And this is where the Greeks do begin to possess a clearer picture of their creators. For millions of years, the progenitor race lived in Sirius before deciding to expand and investigate a newly discovered solar system rich with compatible resources, ours. Thus the progenitor group left the Sirius system for our own. The planet left bracket 701 Mars specifically. Although desolate, Mars held a rich compatible atmosphere full of space for colonization. They settled Mars and thrived for 100,000 years. At the end of that time period, a catastrophic event occurred, so they abandoned Mars for Earth. When they arrived to Earth, it was not ideal. The environment and Earth's atmosphere was all wrong, so they began to die. To continue their lineage, they created a genetically enhanced offspring to cope with Earth's hostile environment. The Anu, they also created a servant caste for the Anu called the Ilo. In the tablets, the Ilo were also called the Achromatic and Formicid. These would be your typical Grease. They were created to provide the Anu with the workforce gathering resources required to live comfortably. The Ilo Grease were also created to oversee the indigenous primitive Earth population of early humans. For reasons unknown, the Anu became afflicted with the same genetic predisposition that caused a weakness in the immune system against the harsh, ever-changing environment of Earth. To continue survival, they needed to create a new, better genetically enhanced successor group. This new group, they called the Austro-Albus, also called Lumina, Lightbringers, and the Immaculate Ones. These names are based on numerous translations of references found in the tablets. The word Austro is a phonetic translation. We have no definition for it, nor do we know the origin. Albus means light or white, with the Anu now dying. The Austro-Albus were now the primary group in the hierarchy, and the last hope. Before the Anu died off, they warned the Austro-Albus of the threat the Ilo Grease could one day pose, and to prepare for it. To never allow their numbers to become too large, and to restrict their interaction with the indigenous populace, as they might become too powerful to control one day. These words would be very prophetic, and soon the Anu died off, With some critical flaw and incompatibility to thrive within the Earth's environment, the Australbus also became sick. To survive, they would have to do the unthinkable, interbreed with the primitive indigenous populace, but it was their only chance. To avoid extinction, they were forced to integrate with the earliest vestiges of modern humanity. This succeeded. Finally, their quest to live on Earth was realized, but through the integration with the indigenous inhabitants, their lineage was no longer pure, a devastating effect to their psyche. By this time, the Greys also became stronger. Illegrees, in Dulce Cavern. Note the symbol representing the Grey Doctrine. Artist rendition. Created using the details provided by the Khan AI. The writings describe the Illo, or Greys, as a newly created genetic subspecies of scant progenitor homeworld life forms, with no progenitor left. 711 DNA themselves. Created by the progenitors, at the same time as the Australbus, through a selection of predetermined traits extracted from alien life forms. This group was made to serve as a demigod for Homo sapiens, to be used as a method of control over humans, and as a means to avoid interaction with humans, although this prejudice changed. I don't want to stay on this area for too much longer, but here is the bottom line. The Australbus, who are a human alien offspring of the Anu. It's understood that today they are a secret cabal of select alien human lineages, and very powerful. They are a tightly controlled bloodline of alien origin, stretching back thousands of years. Various people who today represent the powers that be amongst the ranks of humanity are members of this group. These are your left bracket 721 Rothschilds, left bracket 731 Rockefellers, and the left bracket 741 Saxe-Coburg-Gotha in England, also known as the left bracket 7C Windsor, all of whom descended from strict marriage. Based on familial lineage and breeding protocols of a select lineage base to preserve the lines, all because of one reason: blood. From the special blood attained through females of the lineage due to certain hormones, it helps them to sustain their ability to withstand the environment. Additionally, they also use secretions of pituitary and pineal glands from captured modern humans, which also acts as strong drug, helping to keep them from succumbing to mental instability caused by environmental stresses and unwanted chemical influence. Sounds strange, but this is exactly what we learned from the Greys writings, and the dissident Greys themselves. Left bracket 68 right bracket zeta reticuli less than retzi. Reticuli is a binary star system located about 39 light years 12 PC away from Earth. It is located in the constellation Reticulum and is visible to the unaided eye in very dark skies. Because of the southerly location of the system, it is not visible north of the tropics. This system consists of a pair of stars that are both similar in physical characteristics to the Sun. Their stellar classification is nearly identical to the Sun, and they are considered solar analogs. Less than one has 96% of the Sun's mass and 84% of the Sun's radius. Z2 is slightly larger and more luminous than 1-1, with 99% of the Sun's mass and 88% of the Sun's radius. The Sirius system is one of Earth's near neighbors. A binary star system, consisting of a white main sequence star of spectral type A1V, termed Sirius A, and a faint white dwarf companion of spectral type .2, termed Sirius B. Sirius is about twice as massive as the Sun, and has an absolute visual magnitude of 1.42. It is 25 times more luminous than the Sun, but has a significantly lower luminosity than other bright stars such as Canopus or Rigel. system is between 200 and 300 million years old. It was originally composed of two bright bluish stars. The more massive of these, Sirius B, consumed its resources and became a red giant before shedding its outer layers and collapsing into its current state as a white dwarf around 120 million years ago. Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun in the solar system. The planet is named after the Roman god of war, Mars. It is often described as the red planet, as the iron oxide prevalent on its surface gives it a reddish appearance. Mars is a terrestrial planet with a thin atmosphere, having surface features reminiscent both of the impact craters of the Moon and the volcanoes, valleys, deserts, and polar ice caps of Earth. The rotational period and seasonal cycles of Mars are likewise similar to those of Earth. Mars is the site of Olympus Mons, the highest known mountain within the solar system, and of Vales Renris, the largest canyon. The smooth Borealis Basin, in the northern hemisphere, covers 40% of the planet and may be a giant impact feature. Unlike Earth, Mars is now geologically and tectonically inactive. Left bracket 71 right bracket deoxyribonucleic acid DNA is a nucleic acid that contains the genetic instructions used in the development and functioning of all known living organisms, with the exception of some viruses. The main role of DNA molecules is the long-term storage of information. DNA is often compared to a set of blueprints, like a recipe or a code, since it contains the instructions needed to construct other components of cells, such as proteins and RNA molecules. The DNA segments that carry this genetic information are called genes, but other DNA sequences have structural purposes or are involved in regulating the use of this genetic information. Left bracket 7 to right bracket the Rothschild family, known as the House of Rothschild, or more simply as the Rothschilds, is a European dynasty of German Jewish origin that established European banking and finance houses from the late 18th century. 5 lines of the Austrian branch of the family were elevated into the Austrian nobility, being given hereditary baronies of the Habsburg Empire by Emperor Francis II in 1816. The British branch of the family was elevated into the British nobility by Queen Victoria. It has been argued that during the 19th century, the family as a whole possessed by far the largest private fortune in the world, and by far the largest fortune in modern history. Left bracket 731 the Rockefeller family, the Cleveland family of John D. Rockefeller, 1839 to 1937. Sr., and his brother William Rockefeller, 1841 to 1922, is an American industrial, banking, and political family of German/British origin that made one of the world's largest private fortunes in the oil business during the late 19th and early 20th century, primarily through the Standard Oil Company. The family is also known for its long association with and financial interest in the Chase Manhattan Bank, now J.P. Morgan Chase. Left bracket 74 right bracket Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, or Saxe-Coburg Gotha German. Herzogtum Sachsen-Coburg und Gotha served as the name of 2 duchies, Saxe-Coburg and Saxe-Gotha, in Germany. The family of the ruling house of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. This family played many and varied roles in 19th century European dynastic and political history. Saxe-Coburg-Gotha was the only European country to appoint a diplomatic consul to the Confederate States of America during the American Civil War. The House of Windsor is the current royal house of the Commonwealth realms. It is a branch of the German House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which adopted the English name Windsor by a royal proclamation on the 17th July 1917. Colonel, how do you know these are families, are related to this Austro-Albus group? The dissident Greeks have warned us about which families on the surface are all Austro-Albus. Those are just some of them, and also because the older writings tell us the original lines of Austro-Albus, and how now they are a strictly controlled lineage. And the last and most modern of the tablets we discovered created by dissident Greece just some 150 hundreds of years ago include data telling us which families are most prominent. The dissident Greeks seem to have compiled lots of data using traitor Austro-Albus operatives for centuries now. We've never met one, but we know that they do exist. Our own intelligence also tells us that select members of each family have been identified within the ranks of various shadow organizations operating today. This means they operate within many of the secretive groups that ultimately culminate into today's global elitist ranks. What is also important to realize is that over the many years, the alien element has since been 99% eradicated, and the remaining lines are now almost pure humans. But in addition to their knowledge and power, they also retain one genetic predisposition that can kill them. This is why they are seemingly so exclusionary and secretive. They have to be. Are there any other prominent American families? Yes, Colonel, with all the families you are mentioning. I have to ask you, are the Austro-Albus the Illuminati? Maybe. Look, I don't know who the left bracket 751 Illuminati are. However, they represent a powerful cabal, a secret organization that is based on bloodlines and mysterious. But I am not going to make that call. All I work with is the intelligence I am provided. All I am saying is that the Greeks have informed us that certain families, the world's most wealthy and influential, are Austro-Albus. The Illuminati, plural of Latin Illuminatus, enlightened is a name given to several groups, both historical and modern, and both real and fictitious. Historically, the name refers specifically to the Bavarian Illuminati, an Enlightenment-era secret society, founded on May 1, 1776. In modern times, it is also used to refer to a purported conspiratorial organization, which acts as a shadowy power behind the throne, allegedly controlling world affairs through present-day governments and corporations, usually as a modern incarnation or continuation of the Bavarian Illuminati. In this context, the Illuminati are believed to be the masterminds behind events that will lead to the establishment of a new world order. And why are the Illo called formicid? Which is a reference to ants. Is it because of their appearance? No. The Illo or Grees were not referred to as left bracket 761 formicid for their appearance, as you might assume. Rather, the writings say that it is for their behavioral traits, which were programmed into their genome, all within the context of their socialization and protectorate nature. It is how the progenitors created them to be. Also, what we know is that the Grees are in fact alien. Their genetics are not from here, nor do they come from the progenitor lineage. Their genetic makeup comes directly from the progenitor race's home planet. Today, however, the species represents a genetic integration and transformation from multiple sources. The tablets make no attempt to hide the fact that the Greeks have, to some extent, shared levels of incorporated alien animal and even alien insect DNA, but again, no progenitor DNA. Their writings record that even we modern humans were modified by the Austro-Albus. But whereas their genetic base comes from the progenitor aliens, ours comes from theirs, which was already heavily modified. And it is what separates us from all other life forms on Earth. We received critical elements of the Australopithecus genome, and for very specific reasons. One more important note is that the archaeological teams determined that many sets of tablets fell into separate social categories and into two primary segments of the alien chronology. There was a pre-war collection of tablets and a post-war collection. We learned that about 10,000 years ago, there was a revolt against the Australopithecus by the Ilo, the Grees. Also, and unbelievably, the chronological calculations made by our researchers show that the Grees may have been living in various North American cave systems from as far back as 26,000 years ago. The family Formicid are social insects, along with the related ants, wasps, and bees belonging to the order Hymenoptera. What prompted the revolt? It resulted from both treachery and betrayal within their groups. As it would seem, they are not so different from us, after all. This is simply incredible. That it is. You are saying that there is a history, extending back thousands of years, maybe 100 to 200,000 years, with ties to the ancient Near East, culminating to a discovery in the caverns of Duke, right here in the southwest. That I am. And no, the chronology is closer to 1 million years. Look. Everything I learned shocked me to my core, and made me re-evaluate our history, religions, and selves. You see, there is much more. At this point he stopped talking, didn't respond with another word, just a glance. Then he left for a few moments to get up and refill his coffee. When he returned he lit another cigarette. After a few minutes, we reconvened to continue our interview. Colonel, I do want to talk more about the two species, but can you elaborate on the fighting, which you said occurred back in 1940? In our phone conversation you mentioned the discovery, but you also mentioned a hostile engagement. Yes, in 1940 the Murik expedition, during their discovery, created a base camp inside the top level of the facility they found. They also set up a surface-level camp above the Mesa Tunnel entrance. Now remember, all of this comes directly from the piles of reports that I had access to. The report of the Murik expedition was very descriptive and stated many events. Within days of setting up their camp, they began to explore further. The newly arrived scientific team would ask for as much material as could be extracted from the caverns. No one knew what this place was and if they would ever be back. As they made their way deeper into the tunnels and down to the second lower level, they had begun reporting sightings of people, so they thought they called them inhabitants. The soldiers, by virtue of lugging around all their gear, could not help but make their presence known to whoever it was down there. Even as they tried to remain quiet and out of sight, they could sense that someone or something was successfully tracking the soldiers. But there was no effort to interact with whoever it was. Not yet. It was reported that some tunnels seemed to be endless, as far as they could see. The description said that the environment had low levels of subdued colored lighting, with a purplish hue, created from some unknown chemoluminescence all along the upper and lower sections of the walls. They could see entrances to unused side corridors, other smaller tunnels, discernible by the shape of the emitted lighting near those entrances. The soldiers noted that the lower you got, the hotter and more humid the tunnels had become. The walls were wet from condensation, not so much in the upper levels, but extremely moist, even dripping in the lower levels. They said that the lower level tunnels smelled a bit like a factory that made industrial chemicals. According to one entry, written by a soldier, although the smell was bad, it was mostly obscured by the humidity, which rendered their sinuses torpid. All the reports stated that there were incidents of the mysterious inhabitants peering from around corners to observe the soldiers, usually from a great distance, almost like shadows. This lasted for several weeks, but there was never real interaction, thus allowing the group to collect and remove as many artifacts as they could. Several of the reports independently wrote about how they were shipping these items back to Murik airfield from makeshift dirt air strips being used near the town of Alamogordo. As the artifacts were transported back to Murik, new equipment and supplies were coming in. The artifacts were being catalogued and placed in a specially demarked area of a hangar operating as a warehouse for later study. Do you mean Haloman AFB, near Alamogordo? No, Alamogordo airfield wasn't built until 1942, after all of this had already occurred. And it wasn't known as Haloman AFB until they renamed it 1947. There was already the Albuquerque Army Air Base in place as early as 1941, but Murik was the operating hub for the Army's intelligence operations, dating back then, and even up to today. Isn't it interesting that Murik is now Edwards AFB, the same site that provides oversight to the Groom Lake installation, another place like Dulce that supposedly does not exist. Speaking of air bases, Albuquerque Army Air Base was renamed to Kirtland Army Airfield in 1942. That's now Kirtland AFB. Yes, it's no Kirtland AFB anyhow. In 1940 we were still searching for potential locations to conduct our atomic development and testing. New Mexico, already having certain facilities in place, coupled with its remoteness, was the perfect choice. But Colonel, what about the tunnels? Can we go back to what occurred with the Murik expedition team? Yes. So several of the soldiers had been tasked with writing everything down to have several perspectives of the expedition as it occurred. This was a common practice back then. There were no laptops, camcorders, or digital voice recorders back in those days, so the report incorporated all the entries from the journal takers, writers, and essentially what we ended up with was a stirring account of some heavy interaction, types of engagement that no one expected. According to the entries from the commanding officer, they managed to hold camp without accidents, injuries while exploring for a while now. It had been 3 weeks in the caverns and corridors, and everyone was getting real comfortable. But as the discovery and collection of more artifacts continued, they found themselves traversing much deeper and deeper into what they now realized were the lower levels. And the walls continued to just get more sophisticated in design as they got lower. By the time they had cleared out the second level and began moving into the third, they began to encounter what seemed to be noises from unknown sources. First, it was a sound, static or hissing noise that would last for several minutes at a time. This lasted for a few hours. Then a mysterious super fast beeping sound would appear out of nowhere, as if someone had deliberately set off the sound right behind you. No one could determine how this was happening as there was no one else down there, they thought. And finally, as they got deeper into recesses of the third level down, an eerily terrifying sound of wood began to manifest, then quickly disappear within the frame of a second. It would come and go, just like that. very loud and disturbing, unnerving the soldiers. This lasted for a couple of hours. Then the sound began to last for several seconds. The echo in the corridor made the sound even more terrifying. By the time the emanating sounds would reach the 5 to 10 second ranges in length, the soldiers could then tell that it was collage of combined screams and cries from adults and children, as if to warn the soldiers. These continued on for hours on end. The report mentioned that over a time span of 2 days, listening to these sounds, one of the officers was able to conclude that what they were hearing was a recording, as if from a phonograph, being played repeatedly. He began to take note of various sounds he swore he had already heard before. He recorded down the times and any phonetically readable and recognizable occurrences he could. And just like that, like clockwork, on each 90-minute mark, the sounds would seemingly repeat. He had created 3 patterns, created of various sounds, over 3 hours, and he had a fellow soldier confirm his findings. This placed the commanding officer at ease. It seemed that the horrible sounds were a recording used to deter the soldiers from moving forward or deeper inside the tunnels. The description of the sounds was one of female humans suffering, interspersed with horrifying cries from children and even men. Terrifying noise. 2 men had to be escorted out of the caves and back up to the surface because they couldn't handle the noise. But these sounds are of people. Just how the hell did they get these recordings, is what one officer seemingly kept writing over and over in his journal. Obviously, to some extent, the sound had gotten to him, too. You could begin to tell that the men writings indicated that they were very agitated. But those that could continue to write unaffected noted that some of the recordings were sounds made by people, but not in any language recognizable to them. In any event, it was working, as this was irritating and growing on the nerves of the men. But then, just like that, it stopped. The stop coincided exactly when the orders were given by the commanding officer to pack up and begin vacating the lower 3rd tunnel back upwards towards the entrance. As if the inhabitants knew the soldiers were leaving. But the report stated that 2 soldiers intent on going lower, and without permission from the commanding officer, caused what amounted to a deadly encounter over a period of the next 3 days. What I am about to tell you comes from the account as written by one of the scientific team officers who interviewed the lone returning soldier. It began when 2 men crawled down into the darkly lit tunnel area where the sounds had been coming from. They wanted to know who had been doing this and why. As they got closer, the walls began dripping with condensation from high levels of humidity and combined heat, almost unbearable for the 2 men. And it got worse as they traversed downward and further in. As they made their way deeper in, they began to hear voices. They were the voices coming from the inhabitants. This scared the hell out of the 2 soldiers. The report described their language as a combination of whispers and clicking noises, similar to some of the exact sounds played in those unnerving recordings used earlier as a deterrent. While they continued on, the soldiers happened upon a group of inhabitants just past a round-shaped doorway near the top of one of the side tunnel, which they had snuck into. Before being noticed, one soldier said that they witnessed up to 50 inhabitants in this one very large room. There were tables with what appeared to be lab equipment, and they seemed to be working, performing experiments or medical procedures on other inhabitants or animals, things not fully recognizable to the soldiers. In the heavy atmosphere of fear and imminent trepidation, so much had been going on that it took a few minutes for the soldiers to even realize that what they were seeing were not humans, but something else. Diminutive-sized people with enlarged heads and huge eyes. This scared the hell out of them. They were frozen with fear and could barely talk to one another at that moment of real electronic televisions, like they had seen in the higher levels, but with vivid colors and showing images of their base camp up on the first level. They were being monitored. They realized that these things could see everything that they had been doing since they arrived. The soldiers tried to make their way back out of the tiny corridor leading up to this vantage point that allowed them to peer in. But as they began to leave, trying not to be noticed, one of them dropped his pistol, which he held in his hand. He picked it back up, but that commotion alerted the entire room to their presence. As they began to quickly vacate, one of the soldiers was grabbed and dragged into the room screaming. The escaping soldier pulled out his pistol and began to run as fast as he could. He could hear pistol shots being fired repeatedly from the other soldier, who was now back in that room. He must have been shooting at those things. As he ran, he heard inhabitant voices right behind him, which only helped him to dig deep and find the strength to run even faster, but they were coming after him and gaining ground. As he gained ground on the upper level, he began to scream out. He said that he had screamed as loud as he could towards his group, but he knew he was still too far out to be heard by anyone. Still too far in the distance, he could however begin to see the distant lights from his base camp emerge. The other soldiers had packed up and were wondering where the two missing soldiers were, waiting to give them hell for making them stay longer. The soldiers at base camp continued to pack up and await further orders before making their way back up to the surface. They were oblivious to the screams from the escaping soldier. He said that as he ran, he screamed and began firing his weapon behind him, hoping to kill whoever was chasing him. His shots finally alerted his group to his presence, and they, being startled by the shooting, began firing in his direction. Even as friendly bullets zipped right by his head, he cared less about getting hit and more about being captured by these things. What he had seen terrified him. The commanding officer wrote in the report